I don't know. This was the closest one I could find that kind of included as many games as I wanted to talk about today. WCW games I'll probably just touch on briefly, because if you're going to mention WCW games, well, there's more WCW games than just World Tour and Revenge, right? I mean, there's Backstage Assault, there's Versus the World on the PlayStation. And if you're going to talk about the WCW games, I feel like then you also have to talk about the ECW games, like Hardcore Revolution and Anarchy Rules and stuff. And then you got to talk about Fire Pro Wrestling, then you got to talk about TNA Impact, and it's just too much, right? So I wanted to keep this as WWE as possible. So I'll just probably touch on those very briefly. Although those are good games, I will say that. Yeah, I kind of just want to jump right into it. Now, this is usually the part of a tier list video where I say something like, hey, this is just my rankings. You know, these aren't the definitive WWE game rankings for everybody. Everybody has different tastes, and what's the best to me might be garbage to you and vice versa. But I'm not going to say that here. These, damn it, are the definitive WWE games tier list rankings here. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, folks. I am the world's foremost authority on WWE games, and I'm about to rank these from S tier to F tier. And there is an F tier, okay? That's there for a reason. Something's going in that F tier. That being said, I have played all of these games extensively, so even if something is low ranked, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily the worst game ever. It's just, I love the WWE game so much because it combines my two favorite things in life, really. Video games and wrestling. I love both of these things so much. So the WWE games have always meant so much to me. I've logged hundreds of hours in probably each of these titles, with maybe a couple of exceptions. So if I put something low, I'm being hard on it, but that's because I want the best out of these games. Because if these games are good, then my quality of life is improved. There's nothing like when a good wrestling game is released. You know what I mean? There's just nothing like it. I still have memories of running home from the school bus to play the new SmackDown vs. Raw, and just how giddy I was on the way home. I miss those feelings. It's why I have this channel. It's why I run this Twitch and this YouTube, because I live for that nostalgia. All right, let me stop running my mouth here, and let's get into this tier list, okay? Now, how should I do this? Should I start with the S tier and then start putting things in there, or should I just go in somewhat chronological order of the games? Loosely, obviously, down here. These All-Stars, Raw 1 and 2, and Day of Reckonings are not in chronological order, but we'll break it down like that. Let's start with the Wrestlemania, the arcade game. Now, this game was released, in like 95, and this was ported from, obviously, the arcade game. And you got to remember, for the time, when the PlayStation was first released, like one of the biggest deals, or home consoles in general, you were getting the arcade experience home with you. Now, that might not seem like a big deal now, because the home consoles we have, like PS5 and Series X's, they just blow away what you can find in our arcade, right? Arcades are kind of not even around, but there was a time, believe it or not, where arcades were where you went to play the best, the hottest, the most cutting-edge technology video games. So for home consoles to grab that arcade experience and bring it to your home television, that was huge. And for a wrestling game to have the quality of an arcade game was very big for its time. Now, what made Wrestlemania the arcade game so great? Well, the commentary, just the presentation. It brought like a real, true TV presentation to your home living room. So that cannot be understated. Wrestlemania the arcade game was phenomenal. It was great, like, buddy action. Like, it was a great sleepover game. That being said, yeah, it shows its age a little bit, but not nearly as much as some of the other games on the PlayStation. Like, I think Wrestlemania the arcade game, because of its art style and graphical abilities, holds up way better than, like, WWF Attitude or Warzone. I think this is one of the best wrestling games released on the PlayStation. The PlayStation version, I think, is the best version. That's why I mention it so much. So I'm going to go ahead for its impact, for what it meant and what would become on WWE home console games, I think this deserves to be in the B tier. I think that deserves to be in the B tier. So that's where I'm going to put that. Okay, like I said, the WCW games, I'm just going to touch on them briefly. I don't know why they're included in this tier list. But THQ's first venture into the wrestling video game market, if you want to call it that, were these games right here, World Tour and Revenge. These were great games. The Aki engine was introduced, phenomenal engine. We're going to talk a lot more about the Aki engine in a little bit here, as you can see. But these games, just for their significance and their importance in wrestling games and the evolution, the natural progression of what gameplay would become and customization suites and what have you, I think these games deserve to be a little high on the tier list, but you have to take some points off because just a lack of game modes, especially for these games in particular, World Tour and Revenge. There weren't too many game modes for the time. So I think these are C tier games, which is not bad. C tier is pretty good. But these are supposed to be WWE games, so I don't want to talk too much about the WCW games because WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy are just strictly better versions of these games, right? WrestleMania 2000, man, this was a game changer when it came out. I remember playing WrestleMania 2000. I rented it from a Blockbuster, I think. And I brought it home not really knowing what to expect. I just saw that it was a wrestling video game, and I was very hyped about that. A WWF wrestling video game. I brought it home, put it in, turned it on, and it was the stuff dreams were made of, man. I mean, the presentation was off the charts. The entrances, the full entrances down to the ring were awesome. And the gameplay, like I mentioned before, the Aki engine. With WrestleMania 2000, I mean, gameplay was so smooth and in-depth. I couldn't even begin to comprehend. My little kid mind could not comprehend the depthness that was the gameplay. Just the grapple system, the striking system. You had your strong and your weak strikes. You could combo up. You could do certain signature grapples and power grapples. And there was a lot there for the time. And it's a system that people have been clamoring for us to go back to, the Aki engine. It's just phenomenal stuff. WrestleMania 2000 was great. Great game modes, great roster, but a lot of that has to do with the time period that the game was released in, so you can't put too much stock into the roster, right? Because a lot of times games are locked in to whatever roster they just happen to have, like the likenesses of wrestlers that they can use and stuff. But that being said, WrestleMania 2000, just phenomenal, top-tier roster. This game really set the standard, of what WWE games would become going forward. I think WrestleMania 2000 is a B tier game. It did have like a championship mode to it. It was kind of like a career mode, but it was just like match after match. There was no story. You just won, and then you went up higher on the card and challenged for titles and that kind of stuff. Now we're starting to get cooking here. So everything I just said about WrestleMania 2000, how it set the bar for wrestling games going forward, No Mercy just smashes through, right? No Mercy takes that bar and just yeets it up into the heavens. No Mercy is still talked about today, and by many people is the best wrestling game of all time. Is it the greatest wrestling game of all time? I don't know, but it definitely is in the conversation, and for a game that old to still be held in such high regard says a lot about it. Now, we should talk about what makes No Mercy such a great game, and for me, these are my standards of what make a great wrestling game a great wrestling game. One, it has to have gameplay, right? You spend the most time in a wrestling game wrestling in matches. I know it sounds crazy, but yeah, you spend the most time actually fighting an opponent. So that has to be the best part of the game, and No Mercy really nailed it. They improved on everything from an already good system in WrestleMania 2000. THQ and Aki did a phenomenal job just kind of fine-tuning and polishing the gameplay from WrestleMania 2000. It looks visually better as well. The entrances were cut short. They don't show them actually getting into the ring this time. But it's a small price to pay, I think, for the graphical upgrade and the gameplay upgrade and just how smooth it was. But another thing that makes a wrestling game a great wrestling game is how immersive it is, and if it makes you feel like an actual wrestler. And WWF No Mercy was the first game to introduce a actual story mode, where you get to pick any superstar and you get to play as them, challenging for a title, and there's branching storylines. like, if you win or lose, affects how you progress through the story. Now, at the time, that was... At the time, even today, that's kind of unheard of, right? When's the last time you were able to do that, really, in a WWE game? But you didn't actually have to win certain matches. You had options as to how you wanted to progress through the story, and it really added to the replayability of this game as well. The customization in this game is off the charts as well. Just even today's, it holds up well with today's games, honestly, for the sheer amount of options you have. Really fun game modes, endless replayability, a great story mode. WWF No Mercy is an S tier game. I don't think that really surprises anybody here. If you've played all of these games, then you know that WWF No Mercy is just really the epitome of what wrestling games were, especially at that time. It doesn't get any better than WWF No Mercy. I mean, what more can be said about that game that hasn't already been said, right? All right, moving on. Now, WWF Smackdown. Now, I made a YouTube video all about WWF No Mercy, just kind of gushing about it. And in that video, I mentioned that I had a friend that had a PlayStation. I didn't have my own PlayStation. I could only play at his house. And he had this game called WWF Smackdown. And I remember seeing it and being so insanely jealous that I didn't have a PlayStation. Because I had never seen anything like WWF Smackdown before. The gameplay was so fast-paced. It looked so cool. It had a completely different graphical style than what I was used to seeing from WWF games. And I wanted to play it so badly. It had a cool story mode as well. It had so many different match types and game modes. WWF Smackdown began this whole entire tier list really going forward here, as you can see. The great customization, right? That's always big in a wrestling game, is customization. And WWF Smackdown had a decent amount. It didn't have the customization that No Mercy had, and I think some of that was just due to the limitations of this being the first venture into the exclusive PlayStation series that we're going to see going forward for a little bit. But nonetheless, it was a great game, great fast-paced action. I mentioned this before, what like the hallmark of a great wrestling game is how good the gameplay is. And for some people, I understand that SmackDown is a little too arcade-like. It's not simulation-based at all. But there is a fine line between simulation and fun, and there is a way to walk both ends. Now, I will concede that SmackDown is a little more on the arcade side, but that being said, it is still a great game and great fun. I think the first SmackDown game has to go into the C tier. It doesn't hold up as well as some of the later titles, but it is a great game nonetheless. And just the significance that it had and the impact it made going forward just can't be understated. So moving on to SmackDown 2. SmackDown 2 had a vastly better story mode. It was more in-depth. There was more you could do. The loading screens, however, were horrendous in this game. If you guys have played SmackDown 2, Know Your Role, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. You go into season mode, and like 50% of the time you spend in that mode is staring at a loading screen. It's that bad. It's pretty bad. But they introduced even more game modes, more backstage areas, another phenomenal roster to choose from. Just kind of built upon SmackDown, but those loading screens are so bad that I don't think you can even put it in a tier above the original SmackDown game. It was a fine sequel. It moved forward in almost all ways, but it also moved back or sideways or didn't move at all in other directions. So SmackDown 2 Know Your Role, I think, is just a C tier game. All right, moving on to the PS2. Now, this was actually one of the first PlayStation 2 games that I got. It was the first, but I also got Simpsons Road Rage with it. SmackDown Just Bring It. Now, this game is this is where it starts getting a little controversial, right? Because people have different viewpoints of this game, and just based on the opening intro to that game, promises are made that aren't kept with that visual presentation, right? It shows like this cool opening cinematic that you don't see even maybe today by today's standards. It was just kind of showing off the technology of the PS2 and the CGI, what it could possibly render and be. And the game graphically just didn't hold up to the intro at all, not even close. That said, it's more of the archaic kind of action from the previous 2 SmackDown games. It's not simulation style at all. I wouldn't say it's very fast-paced, but it does have a new story mode. Very short story modes. You challenge for various titles with superstars. Once you obtain that title, the story's over. But it does have some branching story paths that you can take. You don't necessarily have to win or lose any match for the story to progress, which again is very important when breaking down video games. The Hell in a Cell match and Just Bring It is awesome. Yeah, agreed. The Hell in a Cell match and Just Bring It is awesome. A lot of the game modes in these early SmackDown games are just a lot of fun. Great co-op fun with buddies, some couch co-op. Just Bring It was a fine game. There were some great game modes, tons of unlockables. I mean, you could really get your money's worth out of this game, just kind of grinding the SmackDown store and just unlocking everything. The Slobber Knocker mode, of course. You can unlock Fred Durst in this game. A lot of hidden secrets in this game, which I like. You were able to roam backstage in the story mode and talk to different guys, and that's something that we would see recurring in a minute here with later SmackDown entries. But that being said, it's not one of the better wrestling games, right? It does feel a little bit shallow despite all the unlockables that you can have. It just feels like it's missing something, whether that's more serious simulation style gameplay, whether that's just a more in-depth story, like longer. Like I said, it's very brief, albeit good. SmackDown Just Bring It, in my opinion, is a B tier game. It's very good, but it's not one of the best games. But it did a lot of things well, like I mentioned before. Gameplay was pretty good. You could go out in the crowd in that game, which was a fun little tidbit. The backstage areas, like I said, were very good. The roster was pretty decent. And I like Just Bring It. I do look at it through rose-colored glasses, I will admit, because it was my first PS2 game. But that being said, I don't think there's any bias in putting it in the B tier. I think that's a fine spot for it. It's just as good as WrestleMania 2000. Okay, moving on to SmackDown Shut Your Mouth. And I love this game. I love SmackDown Shut Your Mouth. The gameplay was just perfect. It's very fast-paced, yes, but it's not as fast-paced as like the original first two SmackDown games, right? It was a little more simulation style. It was a little more reality-based. They slowed it down just a tad, and they started to take themselves much more seriously as a simulation-based wrestling product. And technology had finally evolved to the point where I think they were able to pull that kind of stuff off. Great roster. One of the greatest rosters that you're going to see here listed. Of course, this was 2002, so you had the NWO in there. You had Shawn Michaels in here, Triple H, Kurt Angle, Brock Lesnar, The Rock, and Stone Cold Steve Austin were both still with the company when this game was released. So the roster is phenomenal. The game modes, there's so many great game modes or different match types, I guess I'm trying to say. Customization is through the roof. You're really able to go buck wild with your superstar in this, and you were able to create pretty wild, outlandish superstars if you wanted to. But where this game shines, and if you know me on this channel, you know what I'm going to say, the season mode. The SmackDown Shut Your Mouth season mode. Man, it might be my favorite season mode / career mode out of all of these. 4 years. You get to go through 4 years in that season mode. And I mentioned the Just Bring It season mode being short. I became so accustomed to that, like winning a title and then the season mode's over and then you go challenge for another title. I remember the first time I brought Shut Your Mouth home and I was playing through the season mode. I was playing as Rob Van Dam. I'll never forget it. And I went into the owner's office. I asked for a title shot for the IC title. And I was granted the title opportunity at the pay-per-view. I won the IC title at Backlash. And then I was like, oh, yeah, that was pretty fun. That was a great season mode. And then it kept going. Like, it was the next week. It was the next month. And my mind was just blown that I could keep playing. Little did I know there was tons of gameplay left. Now, the season mode kind of loosely goes off of, like, real WWE storylines. So, you get the NWO invasion. You get, the owners, Ric Flair on Raw, Vince McMahon on SmackDown fighting each other. But they do implement new original storylines within the context of those storylines, if that makes sense. You never have to win a match in this season mode. You never have to win a match. Everything is on the table. You're able to lose any match, which is awesome. You never have to do anything in this game. You're able to be a heel if you want to. You're able to be a babyface if you want to. You're able to align yourself with owners if you want to. You're able to bear the flag for the superstars and rally against the owners if you want to. Man, there's just I can't say enough good things about SmackDown Shut Your Mouth. It's a phenomenal game. My only real nitpick with the game is that you can't edit the difficulty in season mode. It's just stuck at normal difficulty. So if you play the hell out of the game like I have, it becomes a little upsetting how easy the season becomes because you've played the hell out of it. But that said, all the good things I just listed about this game, for me to have that one nitpick, I think says a lot about this game. Oh, and then graphically also, this game holds up surprisingly well. It doesn't have the best graphics, but like its graphical style has a certain charm about it that I think holds up well today. Better than some of the later SmackDown vs. Raw entries in the series. So that being said, SmackDown Shut Your Mouth is an S tier game, guys. It is. I'm sorry. SmackDown Shut Your Mouth is a great wrestling game. It's one of the best. It's one of the best. I love that game. Okay. SmackDown, Here Comes the Pain. So much has been said about this game. So much praise has been thrown at this game. And I'm here to tell you, rightfully so. Did you think I was gonna say anything different? Of course this game deserves praise. All the great things I said about SmackDown Shut Your Mouth, in terms of gameplay, Here Comes the Pain just builds upon. I mean, the layers of depth of gameplay in Shut Your Mouth are absurd. Hey, thanks for the follow, Rofi? Is that how I say it? Thank you for the follow. I do appreciate it. According to my opinion, SVR 2011 and 2K19A. Well, we will get to that. We will get to that. Soda Pop, you say 19's a B. We will get to that, I promise. I'm sorry that I'm rambling so much about all of these games. I just have so much to say about it. About all of these games. And I don't want to leave any out of the limelight. I want to give every game their due time. Especially this one right here. SmackDown, Here Comes the Pain, right? So there was a lot of hype for this game. I remember me and my friends just... these were like in the early days of the internet still, but I remember us just like scouring the IGN forums and just staying up with the newsletters and the magazines, and we would stay up at night at sleepovers just like talking about what could be in SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, because Shut Your Mouth had set the bar so high that a sequel, our expectations were through the roof, right? And Here Comes the Pain did not disappoint. Like I mentioned previously, the gameplay is the stuff dreams are made of. I long for the days of this game. Gameplay never was this good again. It was the perfect blend of simulation and arcade. The perfect blend. I mean, it didn't get any better. It was fast-paced, but it also had such in-depth grappling and striking systems that the blend, like I said, was perfect, and we still haven't matched that gameplay today, in my opinion. The season mode, while albeit is not 4 years long like Shut Your Mouth, is just more a very in-depth year-long story. And like in Shut Your Mouth, you never have to win. You're able to lose if you want to. You can kind of choose your own destiny. You can challenge for titles if you want to. You don't have to challenge for titles. You can just go into generic storylines if you want to, or you can talk to a superstar backstage and kind of book your rivalries on the fly if you wanted to. Now, you don't get to roam the backstage area. They took that out from just bringing in Shut Your Mouth, and we won't see that return for quite some time, unfortunately, in the SmackDown series. But it was still really neat. You could always find somebody walking around backstage, and they were written very well. There was no voiceover yet, but wrestlers were written very well. They read like their real-life counterparts. But yeah, the season mode was phenomenal. The customization creation options were very nice as well. You were just like in Shut Your Mouth, you're able to customize the brands, the roster, so you can kind of it adds to replayability. So you can face like different superstars on different playthroughs in the season mode. The match types were very good. The Elimination Chamber, of course, was introduced into this game. And that was back when the Elimination Chamber was actually dangerous. Like, there were no mats on the outside of the Elimination Chamber. You got slammed on the outside of the chamber, you're hitting that steel. Like, there were no mats. And the glass was even more brutal then, too. Not saying that. I understand why they made the changes. People were really getting hurt in those Elimination Chamber matches. They had to do something. But still, I digress. Here Comes the Pain was a great game, great roster. Had blood. Did I mention that? SmackDown Here Comes the Pain had blood. That's a big thing. That's an S tier game, of course. How could it not be? These three games are really the holy trinity up here. And are we going to get another S tier game? I don't know. Let's find out. I have done no preparation for this video. I'm doing this literally on the fly here. Okay, let me take a little swig of Pepsi for the working man here. Cheers. "2K15 deserves none of my time. That game sucks." Whoa, harsh words. Okay, so next we got SmackDown versus Raw, the first one in the series. Now, the big thing with this game was voiceover. I remember in the trailers, or the commercials leading up to this game, SmackDown vs. Raw had voice-overed superstars. And that's for the season mode, of course. They had the superstars really come in and do their lines, which I know doesn't even sound like a big deal today. But actually, it isn't a big deal, because in some of the My Career game modes from later series, the superstars don't even voice themselves over. So maybe it is a big deal. There is a year-long season mode in this one. And this was really where we saw a graphical departure from what we were accustomed to seeing. Some people don't like SmackDown vs. Raw graphics quite as much as Here Comes the Pain. And I don't either. There's a higher polygon count, of course, and the wrestler models are vastly different. But I don't think different's necessarily bad. It has its unique style. See, this was during a time where wrestling games from a year-to-year basis actually felt different. They felt like different games, for better or for worse, mind you. I'm not saying that that's a good or bad thing, but just the fact that they felt different was awesome. You know, how you get 2K, especially later on, got into kind of a lull where every game kind of felt the same. And that's real easy for a sports game to do. As an avid 2K and Madden player, I can tell you firsthand that innovation is very hard to come by when a game is released on a yearly basis like that. But during this time, THQ did a great job of making every game feel unique and different. But SmackDown vs. Raw might have been the beginning of the end of that kind of formula. This was a good game. Gameplay-wise, it was very good. Still kind of fast-paced, but also kind of gravitating more towards the simulation style, definitely. There were some... Well, now that I think about it, I think the only backstage areas were like the specific to those match types, so like the parking lot brawl, which was introduced in this game. So a lot was taken out in the SmackDown vs. Raw games. The story was pretty good. Again, you don't have to win or lose for the story to progress. You were in control of your own destiny, and if you weren't challenging for a title, they would throw you into another story. So there was always something to do. Yeah, see you, Ro. Thanks for checking us out. I'll see you next time. Thanks for dropping by. You'll have to catch up with the video later. Take care. Yeah, so SmackDown vs. Raw was a great game. Good customization options, although not as much as Here Comes the Pain. You were able to customize your own championship belt, though, which I thought was very cool. And you could play online for the first time, too. So you can make a championship belt and defend it online. So that's very cool. Pretty innovative feature that we would see become the norm later on down the line. SmackDown vs. Raw was a great... This is a tough one to rank, right? Because it is a very good game. It's not as good as its predecessors, and it's not as good as some of the games that would end up succeeding it. But I think SmackDown vs. Raw is a C-tier game. That might be a little low for some people. I just don't think that it holds up as well as some of the other games in the series. It does some things well, but it feels very much sort of like an unfinished like it left a lot on the table, I feel, in some regards. I feel like it could have been fleshed out a little bit more. Okay, SmackDown versus Raw 2006. So this is where they said, okay, we're not gonna do um, a SmackDown insert slogan here. We're just gonna slap the year on there, and this is where you get into that kind of formulaic releases of the SmackDown versus Raw series. So 2006 didn't have a very long season mode. Instead, they just had a series of stories. And once those stories were over, your season mode was done and completed. But you didn't have to win or lose any of the matches, and the story would kind of somewhat adjust accordingly. It felt a little more railroaded than some of its predecessors, definitely. You believe it was 6 months in the chat there? Yeah, that sounds about right. But we can talk about graphics. This was like the first game where you got to see like a huge graphical upgrade, in my opinion. SmackDown vs. Raw 2006 definitely had a much higher polygon count per character model than SmackDown vs. Raw. You're really starting to see the transition into a simulation-based product now as well, as opposed to arcade style. And this was an interesting time in WWE. Just looking at the cover there, you see Batista and John Cena. This was a transitional period in the company, so the rosters look a little different as well. There are the introduction of more legends to unlock as well. So the roster is pretty decent. Like I said, the story mode is fine. I remember having this game on multiple platforms, so there was like exclusive content on other platforms that you played the game on, which I should mention. This was the first game in a while to be featured on multiple different platforms. I had it for the PSP, and I know there was like specific game modes to the PSP. Like there was a Eugene game mode where you got to do his entrance, and like he did the little airplane spin. You had to keep balanced. There was like a Texas Hold'em poker game that you could play with the superstars. GM mode was a huge introduction into this series. And while GM mode would become better, this was a fine kind of introduction to what that could be. That's a game mode that even today people are still clamoring to see return. GM mode was very innovative, and when you play these games, especially as an adult, I feel like all wrestling fans' fantasy book, right? That's part of the fun of being a wrestling fan. Well, this game actually lets you kind of live out those fantasies, and you can run your show as you see fit. So definitely gets a plus in that department. This is another tough one to rate for me. I do think it improved on SmackDown vs. Raw. I do. So I want to put it in the B tier, I think. SmackDown vs. Raw 2006 was a very good game. It just feels a little lacking in terms of customization and the just the season modes that we were used to seeing. Now, it did implement a whole nother game mode in GM mode, but it wasn't as fleshed out as it would end up becoming overall. So, yeah, I think B tier is a good little spot for it. All right, moving on to SmackDown vs. Raw 2007. If I had to pick the game on this list that I spent the most time playing, that I logged the most hours into, it would probably be this one. SmackDown vs. Raw 2007. I have such great memories with this game. I want to stay as unbiased as possible and kind of look at this game objectively. So it built on to the season modes and the GM modes that I was talking about. Actually, in the season mode, you were able to... They went for more immersion with the locker room and whatnot, and I feel like the actual storylines were a lot better in SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 as well. It's not the longest season mode, like Shut Your Mouth or Here Comes the Pain or what have you, but at this point they've really moved away from that, and this game is full-on simulation style. I will say that. The arcade days are over. The transition's complete. This is a reality-based game. And it does it very well because it's still a hell of a lot of fun. The rosters are great for the time. Like I said, the GM mode and the season modes are improved. Graphically, this game is very good. To date, as we stand on the 07 timeline on the tier list, these are the best graphics by far. This was the first game to be featured on Next Gen. So it was on the 360, so you got to see the upgraded HD graphics. I remember in the trailer seeing John Cena and Kurt Angle, and they were sweating in the trailer. And to me, I was like, that's it. We've reached the pinnacle of presentation in WWE games. The superstars are sweating. That's insane. It's never going to get better than that. Of course, it would end up being better. But this game does so much so well. The presentation, the entrances. This was where I feel like WWE games really nailed the entrances. Presentation was like perfect. The crowds looked better. The ring looked better. Commentary was good. Commentary was funny. But yeah, this is a very good game. I want to put it in S tier very badly. I want to put it in S tier very badly. But I can't help but think I'm being biased and giving it more due than it deserves. This is a tough one. I'm going to throw it in the S tier. I think SmackDown versus Raw, for me, okay, let me put it this way. For me to even contemplate if it deserves to be in the S tier, I think gives it the S tier, right? If I have to think about it, then it deserves it, right? That's how I view it. So wow, we have 4 games in the S tier already. I didn't see that coming. I wonder if any more will join it. Let's find out. SmackDown vs. Raw 2008. Ugh. So it feels like for so long we were on this trajectory, right, of kind of going up. So picture a graph, and there are some ups and downs within that graph, but overall it's going up, right? Long term, like if you zoom out, it's going up. 2008 is like the first game where it like significantly dipped for me. 2008, yes, I did play this on stream before, and it was kind of a disaster. I feel like they added too much into the game, and this was like the first release where I could see that the wear and the toll of releasing a yearly entry into the series was kind of starting to add up on THQ's end, because this game felt very unfinished. It was very unpolished. The 24/7 mode is just bad. I'm sorry, it is. It's a cool concept, right? You get to live the life of a WWE superstar and like train and do appearances, do autograph signings, work on your promos and stuff. But the execution is just very piss poor, and the storylines don't make any sense. Whether you win or lose doesn't matter, but in a bad way, because it's irrelevant, because the story doesn't really change. And even if you win some matches, there will be glitches, and you'll be portrayed like you lost the match, or vice versa. Just a lot of stuff doesn't make sense. A lot of the backstage, like emails and stuff you receive from other superstars, don't make sense. They don't apply to what is happening in the story. It's just a big mumble-jumbled mess. GM mode's fine. It's not as good as the 07 GM mode in my opinion. But there's just I don't know. The game modes aren't very good. The gameplay's fine. It's not my favorite in the series. You'll see the ECW featured in there, so there were like Extreme Rules matches. There were different archetypes for superstars too. That was kind of cool. You had your powerhouses, your hardcore, your technicians, your high flyers. You can superstars felt different in the ring, which is good. Cruiserweights felt like cruiserweights. Super heavyweights felt like super heavyweights. But this is not one of the better games in the series overall. I'm going to have to put SmackDown vs. Raw 2008, I think, in the D tier. I think that's where that belongs. Left a lot on the table. It could have been a lot better. I'm very disappointed, especially coming off of 2007. Maybe in a vacuum, this game wouldn't have been so bad. But coming off of 2007, you go to 2008, and the game is just so much worse in like every possible area. I mean, that's bad, right? That's bad. Okay, 2009. Now, this is a fun one. I had forgotten how good 2009 was until recently. I played through a little bit of it on stream. 2009 gameplay is very fun. It's very simulation-based, but it's still very fast-paced as well, which I think is an accurate representation of the in-ring product, especially now. But at the time, it was certainly gearing in that direction as well. The big selling point for this game, of course, it was the tag teams. They kind of revamped them. They introduced the hot tag and momentum and, more double team moves and stuff. And that was very good to see. Because a lot of times when you play with your buddies, you want to do tag matches and stuff. And they were lacking. They needed to be polished for a while there. And SmackDown vs. Raw 2009, I think, did an excellent job at that. No more season modes. This was Road to WrestleMania. So I think what happened was, following the disaster of the 2008 24/7 mode, where it was just all over the place, it was very unfocused, they decided to cut the length of the season mode down, but compensate for that by making the experience a lot more immersive for the wrestler that you were playing as. So it was more focused on your character. Your character was voiced over, and your character was mentioned in the story by name. It was very much about you. And crowd signs would appear within the Road to WrestleMania about the context of your storyline, things like that, right? That you just wouldn't have seen in previous games, and really any of them. So I thought Road to WrestleMania was very well done. Did add create a finisher, very true, which was awesome. I mean, that's so sick. I mean, how many times were you playing with action figures as a kid, and you made up a finisher, and you're like, oh, if I was in WWE, this would be my finisher, and it'd be some crazy little spin slam. Well, in this game, you could do that, and it was very cool. Graphically, this game is very good as well. No complaints there, and you won't see me complain about the graphics for a while, because I think that they really nailed it at this point. Presentation is awesome. Gameplay is very good, like I said. Road to WrestleMania mode was good. Customization options were superb as well, although not as good as they had been or will be. They were just fine in this opportunity. This was a good game. It isn't one of the best games, right? But it's very good. I'd like to put SmackDown vs. Raw 2009 up in the B tier. I think it's better than all the other games below it, definitely. But I also don't think it's better than WrestleMania 2000, or Just Bring It, or 06, or the arcade game. So I think B tier is a good little home for it. Alright, moving along. SmackDown vs. Raw 2010. This was a game. I think this was the last game that I had looked up, like, extensively, like being online and forums just 24/7, trying to find out as much info I could about a game. Because I set the bar so high, and I had expectations that the game just couldn't possibly live up to. That being said, let's talk about some things that this game did well. Customization. All the quarrels I had with 09 for maybe just mediocre customization, despite the creative finisher, 2010 did a lot better. I felt like there were far more options. It really fine-tuned a lot of things about 09. Road to WrestleMania is in full swing here. They added the addition of the Create a Story in this one, which was awesome. The best part about Create a Story, to me, was the ability to share it with others. Play through other people's stories and stuff. Yep, mentioned in the chat here, this is the game where you could never get bored because of Create a Story. Yeah, the possibilities were endless. For so long people would complain about the stories in some of the previous games. Well, here you go. You think you could do a better job? You do it. And they gave you pretty good tools to do that with. SmackDown vs. Raw 2010 is a good game, and it did a lot for innovations in the series, I think. Now, granted, they didn't really stick with some of the innovations it made. But yeah, this is a good game. I really like the gameplay in it. One of the best menus in a SmackDown game as well, I will say. I do like the background on the menus where you're able to train. I'm going to put SmackDown vs. Raw 2010 in the C tier. Because it's a fine game. But I did prefer 2009 in terms of gameplay. But that's my personal style. I like a faster paced product. And I felt 2009 did that very well. That being said, SmackDown vs. Raw 2011 built on a lot of things that 2010 did. but this was a much needed overhaul in terms of gameplay and physics. This is not even the real cover to 2011. I don't know why that's the cover there, but SmackDown vs. Raw 2011 felt like a much needed adrenaline shot into the series, because at this point it was starting to get formulaic, kind of getting repetitive, and I feel like 2011 was when they really realized that they needed to make some changes, and they did it positively. Now, I don't know if like sales affected that or whatever, or just that's just the nature of a year-to-year series where just some games will feel more polished than the others. I don't know, but 2011 was definitely very good. I liked the Road to WrestleManias. I liked the whatchamacallit, the community creations were huge. This is where customization really came back full swing, I feel, too. There was a lot of room for creativity in 2011. I remember that was actually a big selling point in the trailers as well. I forget, was this the first one where you were able to have a custom superstar in the Road to WrestleMania? It may have been. I like this game a lot. I think this is a B-tier game. I think it's right up here with the great B-tier games in the series. And mostly what carries 2011 for me... Oh, that was 2010 with the first one? Okay. For me, that was the best thing about this game was the gameplay. Ladder matches were fun again. Table matches were fun. Like I said, and I'm beating a dead horse here, but in-game, the actual matches... the fluidity, that's what holds the most merit with me in making these decisions. And 2011 checks all the boxes in that department. Okay, now we're really chugging along here. We're on to WWE 12. This game really felt different, not just in title, but just in presentation overall, right? It looked different. It felt different. It was good stuff. Now they introduced a lot of new things in WWE 12. Wait, chat's about to cancel me. Chat, I'm sorry. This is how I feel about this stuff, and I said at the beginning that I'm not going to make any apologies, even though I just did. WWE 12 was good. I liked the gameplay in WWE 12. They maintained a lot of the things that made 2011 so good. And, they retained that Road to WrestleMania mode. And there were some good ones. I do like WWE 12 quite a bit. We'll talk about Universe mode going forward here and how important that was in the series and how people kind of clamor for the return of a competent Universe mode. All of those are well noted at this point. WWE 12 definitely starts a trend for the subsequent series going forward here. Not to the degree that 13 would, in my opinion, but 12 is a fine game. I'm going to go ahead and put it in C tier. I think that's a good place for it. I think WWE 12, I remember that kind of started the trend of like a featured superstar in a game coming back in real life, because I remember Brock Lesnar was big for this game. Like, he would return in your Universe mode. And then he returned the night after Mania, where Cena lost to Rock and attacked Cena. And everybody knew Brock Lesnar was there. All right, moving on now. On to WWE 13. I got to start chugging along here because this is taking entirely too long. I got too much to say about these games. WWE 13. Now we're straying away from the Road to WrestleManias, the story modes. These are changes for the worse, in my opinion. Now, let me get the goods out of the way first. WWE 13 has just a banger of a roster, right? The Attitude Era is featured predominantly in this, and what more can be said about the Attitude Era, right? It has impacted so much about how we enjoy wrestling, and it's impacted the business today. Just a great time for the business. So of course it gets featured in its own little showcase mode here on WWE 13, and they do a good job with it, I think. That being said, I've seen all that stuff. You know what I mean? And this is a common criticism that I'm going to have going over the next few games here, is the showcase mode. It's just not for me. Especially now that we have the WWE Network. I mean, if I wanted to relive those things from the past, I could just go on the network and relive it anytime. I don't need it featured in a game of things that I've already done before. When you get a game, you want a new experience, and replaying previous things that have already happened and completing objectives that have already... that's not for me. I don't want to replay things. I want to make my own creations and stuff. And I think that was a big mistake to go in that direction by WWE Games, because you think about what made these S-tier games so good were customization and great stories, season modes, originality, branching paths and decisions, and WWE 13 kind of took a lot of that away, I feel. Now, the Universe mode was very good in 13, don't get me wrong, I liked it. Gameplay was good as well. It was a fine game in a lot of areas, but it notably is not one of the best games. It doesn't hold up as well as one of those best games. That being said, gameplay is still good and the roster is still good. WWE 13. It's a C-tier game. It's a C-tier game. It's not one of the better games. I mean, it's fine. A lot of people look back on that game fondly, and I do too. I mean, C-tier is not bad, guys. You gotta understand, C-tier is not bad. It's just, there's only so many tiers, and they can't all be up in the high tier, and a lot of these games, unfortunately, are not as good as they could have been, which is why they're in C-tier, And look at the company that WWE 13 is in here. It's the first two SmackDown games, SmackDown versus Raw 20... I mean, come on, these are great games in there. They're just not as good as the upper tiers, obviously. All right, this is where I'm really going to split the chat. I'm going to split the room. A lot of young guys, this was like their first WWE game or one of their first ones. So I do respect that. I do respect that. A lot of people tout this as like the last great wrestling game. I got news for you guys. It's not. This game is very overrated. It's one of the most overrated games in the WWE Games history. It's fine. They had the 30 Years of Wrestlemania showcase mode. Again, not a showcase mode guy. So that is just kind of whatever. You can toss that in the trash. This is where gameplay also really started to feel very robotic. They tried to go too simulation-based with these next few games. And like I mentioned previously in this video, there's a fine line between fun and simulation. And I think you can blend the two together. I mean, you can. Look at what Here Comes the Pain and SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 did, right? The problem of them wanting to go so simulation-based and slow the action down, the problem with that is that it wasn't an accurate representation of what the product had become. Because at this point, the indie revolutions happened. CM Punk and Daniel Bryan are on the main roster. You're seeing more and more guys flying around the ring. The action's a lot more fast-paced. I feel like the kind of slow, robotic gameplay style of these few games in the 2K series were just not... It wasn't simulation at that point, because what it was trying to simulate had completely evolved to a point where all these games just feel really slow to me. That being said, I mean, 2K14, it's a fine game. Like I said, I feel like it's one of the more overrated games in the series. Nothing about it stands out to me at all. I know a lot of people are going to be upset with that, especially the younger guys. I'm sorry. But I've had top shelf. You can't feed me mid when I've had top shelf. I'm not going to go for it. I've played all of these games. I'm just not. I'm not feeling what everyone else feels about 2K14. It's just not there for me. Okay, 2K15 feels really bare, right? I remember playing this on PS4. It was the first one I played on the PS4, and it just felt very lacking. It felt unfinished. It definitely felt like the first venture onto a next-gen console. The showcase mode was reduced into just a couple feuds, which just did not do it at all for me. Gameplay was also very poor. It slowed down even more from 2K14, and this is where the series is really starting to go off the rails for me. Soda Pop says, don't even talk about it. It lacks a lot of customization. very badly, and that's one of the highest priority things in a wrestling game since the beginning, since these early games, since the Smackdown game here. I mean, customization is huge. It's like the most fun part of a wrestling game. You couldn't even create a female? Come on, man. Yeah, the gameplay was slow, a snail's pace. It's just not a good game. I'm going to have to put 2K15 down here in the E tier. It's not a good game. I think it's worse than 2008, so I didn't want to disrespect 2008 by putting it on the same level as this piece of trash. So let's keep 2K15 on the E tier. Okay, moving on. And I know I said I wasn't going to talk about these next few games too much. I just can't help myself. But yeah, I'm already over an hour here. Let's start chugging along here. 2K16 was a fine game. It did improve on 2K15, but it's not a particularly good game. The 2K Showcase focused solely on Stone Cold Steve Austin and his rise to fame, his rise to prominence. I mean, that was pretty cool. I love Stone Cold Steve Austin. He's maybe one of my favorites of all time. Maybe the favorite. I'd have to sit down and think about it. That's an entirely different video in and of itself, though. That being said, like I mentioned, since WWE 13, the showcase mode is not it. I don't like it. It's not for me. I won't scoff at its inclusion under the sole condition that you include at least a separate season or career story mode or whatever. And they introduced those My Career modes in these games here, coming up these next few games, and it's just very kind of bare bones, which sucks because you look at the NBA 2K series and how good their My Career is, and you're like, why can't you just have the same team who worked on that work on this? And if they are, then why are they so vastly different? This is during a point where commentary is just not caught up with the NBA 2K series as well. And the only reason why I bring up NBA 2K so much is because it's 2K sports, So 2K16, I'll put in the C tier. You'll notice a common theme. Most of these games are just kind of fine coming up here. You know what I mean? 12, 13, 14, and then 6. They're fine. They're not the best. Okay, moving on to 2K17. This for me is where my interest in wrestling games were at an all-time low. I've definitely logged the fewest hours in these next few games, with the exception of 19. I played a good amount of that. But 17 does not do anything to stand out from the rest of the pack, in my opinion. It's just a mediocre wrestling game, in my opinion. I'd say it takes a step back from 2K16. Nothing about it is really tremendous. My Career shallow as always. Gameplay is stale. Gameplay is not my cup of tea at this point. It has not improved since I first critiqued it here with the early 2K games. And the same could be said about 2K18 in my opinion. It's just, this is really formulaic now. We're getting into the point where we're getting into the same rut that Madden and the NBA series gameplay-wise are stuck into. And I know I praised the NBA series a while ago, but anybody who's played that series extensively from a year-to-year basis will tell you that although, My Career is very good, but where's the next progression in that? You know what I mean? Just because you're good doesn't mean you should be complacent in that role, but when you release a game on a year-to-year basis, yada, 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 you get stuck in these ruts. Same with 2K19. Some people say that, okay, if you don't think 2K14 was the last good wrestling game, some people say 2K19 is the last great wrestling game. I totally disagree with that. This game is fine. It's average. It's a hell of a lot better than 2K20, I'll give you that. But right after 2K14, I think this is the most overhyped wrestling game. It's fine. It's fine. It's stuck in that same unfortunate formulaic garbage that the lesser ones are in. And I mentioned this earlier on the stream. THQ managed to do this well. Now, THQ was not without their faults, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they're the perfect game, or the perfect publisher or what have you, but every game from a year-to-year basis felt different. It felt like a unique product. You were getting a different game. For better or for worse, it felt completely different. And with these last few games, that's not the case at all. These feel like the same exact games. I mean, I feel like you were able to skip a year or two in between games and not even notice much of change between them. 2K20, hot stinking pile of garbage, completely unplayable for a lot of people. I don't even want to spend too much time talking about this game. I haven't played it in many months. I don't know if it was patched or... It was so bad that they didn't put out a 2K21 because they realized... And kudos to 2K for realizing that. Whether the pandemic had any impact on that or not is irrelevant because this game released before then. And it was garbage then at release, so you can't really pin the blame on that. This is a bad game, trash game. Put it E tier. I think that's being generous. And then we'll get on to some non-Smackdown series games, just a few of them. Now, granted, the Wrestlemania games are not in here. I could talk about those real quick. They're pretty bad. WrestleMania 18 is very bare bones on the GameCube. It's fine gameplay-wise, but it won't stand out from the rest of the pack. Same with 19, although it has the very unique story mode of the revenge angle. You get let go, and then you got to fight your way back into the HQ, and there's fun backstage areas, and you're yeeting guys off of buildings and stuff. So it's a pretty fun game, but it's not going to be S, A, or B tier. And then WrestleMania 21, which had jumped from the GameCube to the Xbox. That game is a piece of crap. I mean, the story mode was pretty good, but the gameplay was just unforgivable. Very bad. A lot of these Xbox games are very... they look pretty, but they're just bad. All right, now that that's out of the way. All-Stars. Great game. Very fun game. Strictly arcade-based, of course. Not much to it. Of course, there's not going to be a story or season mode, but there are cool game modes, and there are like different paths you could go down to unlock things. Like The Undertaker has like a challenge mode, DX has like a challenge mode, and so on and so forth. This is a good game. It's good fun. It's not one of my favorite games or anything, but yeah, it's a fine game. I'll put it in the C tier. It's good play. It's good like co-op couch play with a buddy. Good sleepover game is WWE All-Stars. Okay, moving on to the Raw series. I mentioned it before, the Xbox games were very underwhelming. But just the fact that there was a Raw game for the Xbox, I remember just begging my mom for an Xbox solely so I could play this game. And I eventually got one, and let me tell you, I I regretted it. I should have asked for something else. I should have asked for, I don't know. I should have asked for new shoes or something, because this game was a piece of crap. There's not much to it. It looks pretty, like I said. Customization options are actually unique to the Xbox games in terms of like the entrance. You could customize the exact lighting on the ramps and stuff, and pyro. The creative entrance in these games were actually very good, and they were good things that were later implemented into the later PS2 entries in the series. So these games aren't total wastes of space, but they aren't very good. The same thing with Raw 2. The story mode is super bare bones. I mean, you could like go backstage and attack certain people, or it was a goofy game. Like you could set traps for people. You could and they would either succeed or fail sometimes. And I'll have to stream this one someday. If you haven't played this game, you should play it just to experience the goofiness that is the season mode. Raw 2 I'll put in the D tier. There's not too much to say about it. Alright, the last two. These are probably the most interesting two on the list. Day of Reckoning is a great game. It was released on the GameCube, so I feel like it didn't get as much shine as some of the other games, but it's still a THQ game, and it handles very well. The gameplay is phenomenal in these games, and the story mode is also very good. Graphically, maybe it doesn't hold up as well as some of the other its contemporaries at the time, but I don't think they're bad graphics by any means. You'll see a lot of crossover between the two. Now, the knock on the story mode is that you have to win, or you have to complete the objectives to progress in the story, so you can't put it on the same level as these S tier games up here, where you can kind of forge your own destiny. But these are great games. I love that Day of Reckoning 2 is a somewhat of a continuation of Day of Reckoning 1 in terms of the story mode. It takes place a year after the fact. So I'll also throw that in A tier as well. because I like it quite a bit, and they build on a lot of the things that made Day of Reckoning 1 very good. So here's my tier list rankings, guys. Like I said, this is the definitive tier list. If you disagree with it, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. This is it. 2K14 and 2K19 are overrated as all hell. These are the best 4 games in the series. These are the 2 worst. I mean, I think this is a pretty bang-up list. Not bad for on the fly. Just a little over an hour here. Just a little over an hour. Thank you guys for checking this out. I do appreciate it greatly. If you're watching this on Twitch after the fact, make sure you follow so that you're aware when I go live. Many of you watch my videos after they're already done being live, and I get that because I do stream at erratic times. But that's why it's so important to follow, because then you're aware of when I do go live. That's TTV/methodless. If you're watching this on YouTube, do all the YouTube stuff for me, por favor, so that I know to make more content for you. Yeah, thanks for being here. You guys take care. I'm going to talk to the chat now.